And welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. Thankfully, we have not yet been canceled. Thank you for your continued support in helping this podcast continue to function. I am your host, publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. Joining me today is not Brian Fisher. Brian Fisher had the audacity to have to spend some time this afternoon being a father. Something about, there's ice storms everywhere and it's messed up travel. And now I have to watch my infant children. And fine, go take care of that, Brian. I'll handle this myself. But fortunately, we don't have to just listen to me talk for 40 minutes. I'm joined here by an old colleague of mine, an expert in a lot of the things that happen here in college athletics, but particularly things that are happening in one of the most interesting cities in all of college athletics, Louisville. I'm joined here by Mark Ennis of ESPN Louisville. Mark, thanks so much here for taking some time here to chat with me.
No, I'm happy to do it. I'm a big fan. The first home field apparel of any kind that I got was your Extra Points shirt.
Oh my gosh, that is high praise. That is high praise because there's a lot of good stuff. But listen, we'll shill for home field later. Today, I wanted to talk to you, and not just because I'm actually in Louisville today. But Brian and I have been talking, and we've kind of had this on our top of our board here for a while. You have been, following this market and been involved in this market here for a long time, and it feels like Louisville is lurching from one crisis to another since like 2015, with the most recent being. And maybe crisis isn't the right word, but you're looking for a men's basketball coach. So why don't we start with the most specific, and then we'll go big picture. Why didn't things work out with Mac? Because Mac on paper seemed like a great basketball coach, and this is a market and a program where you can win a lot of basketball games. Was there something happening here beyond X's and O's?
I would say it's probably almost entirely beyond X's and O's, and we're not used to this around here. But Louisville basketball, the last time a coach just didn't work out and they just moved on to somebody else was like 80 years ago. Like, this is not what happens here. You have beginning in the late 40s, you have nothing but really successful coaches with one after the other, including almost 50 straight years of having a Hall of Fame head coach. So this was new for everyone. And I think it's been a great lesson for everyone. I think it's perfectly likely that Chris Mack finds another job a little lower down the rung and does an extremely good job, just like he did at Xavier. But this is a great lesson about fit. Yeah. And in particular, I'm talking temperamental fit. I think Chris Mack loved the inherent challenge of kind of overachieving enough to get attention in Cincinnati, right? And Xavier, if everybody in Cincinnati does everything right, Xavier's like fifth, maybe, right? All the pro sports and UC and Ohio State. I mean, it takes a lot. Here, you wake up on third base every day. Like, this is all there is here. And it's a city of 800,000 people. Like, it's a big, you play in an NBA arena. It's the biggest deal here. And everyone feels some level of kind of involvement in and concern about, and everyone's a basketball coach. I mean, the city watches basketball, period. Not just Louisville basketball, all basketball. ESPN, they tell you the top markets for everything. It's always Louisville, always. And I think that he was not prepared for the public role that the basketball coach is supposed to play here, in terms of being energized by the attention. And he came in and he's a recluse. He wants to coach basketball and go home. And Rick Pitino is a freaking rock star. And Denny Crum was a rock star. And he couldn't get him at events. He didn't like doing media at all. Rick, every single press conference was a virtuoso every time. And I think Chris was drained by, challenged by, didn't like all the things that really make Louisville, and started showing some resentment of it really quickly. Year two. And I can remember, I'll give you one good example. I'm in Greensboro. They canceled the ACC tournament. And that was his best team that year. Yeah. They canceled the ACC tournament. And I'm just holed up in a hotel in Greensboro wondering what in the world's going on. And every NCAA basketball coach that I could think of just funneled through ESPN talking about the tournament being canceled. What should they do? What would they like to see him do? How is their team feeling? All that. For Chris Mack, I didn't see it. Anyway, and that sort of thing, I think he started to withdraw and feel kind of some resentment from the fact that he was being expected to really be out there and be public much more than he really likes to do. And I think he just sort of started to withdraw from the job. And then we could talk about this in a minute, but the run-in with leadership when he started to make changes after last year is where I think he really just sort of checked out.
You touch on, I think, a bunch of really unique and important things about being a college, really a Division I college coach, whether that's football or men's or women's basketball, almost anywhere. It's never just about X's and O's. Once you get to a certain level, sometimes you can still fly under the radar. You know, Chris Holtmann in Ohio State, that's a place that has big expectations, but you're not expected to be a quasi mayor. There's some element of glad handing, but you can fly under the radar a little bit. But I want to say maybe Louisville might be the largest example of this nationwide. I'm trying to think of a place that has over 500,000 people, a place where you're going to have multiple dedicated beat writers, but no pro sports to really leech away some of that potential interest. It really is a fishbowl that we in the pros would associate with New York or maybe in some, maybe Chicago in some cases. But that's what this is, right? Like you really have to have a, it's kind of the bit we always said about Texas football, right? You have to be a little bit of a politician to function there. Do you think that's a fair comparison to Louisville men's basketball?
I definitely do. And there are dynamics in the state also that I think make it kind of unique too. With Louisville being in versus the rest of the state. And I know that there are other in-state rivalries where sort of one part of the state roots for this team, one's for the other. But with the state of Kentucky, there's Jefferson County where Louisville is and sort of the surrounding 5 or 6 counties that butt up against it, where there's big populations of people that like Louisville and big populations of, let's just say, minorities. Like it's very different right here than the whole state. And Louisville's always needed kind of an advocate, you know, a public advocate, a big picture person to advocate for the job at all times, either just in terms of PR or in terms of like literally lobbying for the job. And Chris, that's just not Chris, like at all.
That's a good point.
He just didn't like the Breonna Taylor stuff. Like I bet you that stuff didn't fly really anywhere in the state, but it was a big deal here. And Chris Mack was really nowhere to be found with any of that.
You know, I hadn't even thought about that, but now that you mention it, I think you're right. We remember seeing PR statements and things that our program is doing and educational components, probably a third of the schools across the country, and some of them places that you wouldn't expect because they're either very
there knows in it.
Yeah, BYU did this, right? Like places that are as PWI market and coach and roster as it comes. And I'm not saying that they didn't do anything, but I can't immediately recall it. And you compare that to maybe with a similar,
need anything.
Yeah. Well, first, Brian, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you could make it. Let me touch on something you kind of alluded to there a little bit about clashes with leadership, because one of the other things, like I think, you know, over the last 6 months that drew Brian and I's attention to this market is this has not been a place that seems to have enjoyed particularly stable leadership above the coaching level for years. We had an uncommonly public dispute or personality clash or whatever between your old athletic director and university president. And it looked like from outside of the market that, all right, you're going to go to Florida State. That seems that's a promotion on some levels. That's a different kind of gig. And then not only were bridges burned, you didn't even take that job. And then the president ends up leaving too. And so it was like a Mexican standoff where everybody got shot. Like, am I viewing this incorrectly, or is that basically what happened?
No, I think that is exactly what happened. And it really goes back to the person of Chris Mack. I think the president did not think he was a good fit here, especially in terms of the very issues that were being raised about racial issues here in the city. And Louisville basketball's history, there haven't been many chances to hire a coach, but they've never had a black coach, and it is a very black city, and it's been a point of pride, quite frankly. It's how they've been different from Kentucky, right? Like it's been that sort of thing, and he just seemed to not want any part of it. And then when he ran afoul of basically HR, by the way, he fired Dino Gaudio and opened himself up to what happened with the extortion attempt and all that. The president wanted him out. Like I think we've basically been able to piece together. She wanted to fire him over that. Yeah. And they were able to compromise on the suspension, but the blood was all bad from there on. The president and AD didn't get along and didn't agree on it. And Chris Mack kind of felt betrayed by it. And then Vince Tyra sort of felt like he had not been supported in defending his guy, even when he felt like maybe he did deserve something. And then basically all three of them just tried to get out of here for the next 4 or 5 months. Like it's a wild place. After having enjoyed Tom Jurich, who, foibles and all, stable, and president before that in Ramsey, they got along and worked together famously, and you enjoyed a lot of stability, at least when it comes to basketball. So yeah, it's been hectic around here.
Yeah, in case maybe our listeners have forgotten, can you maybe refresh my memory about how the Jurich era ended? Because I recall, was kind of tied to almost every big job throughout the country near the end of that tenure because Louisville Athletics brought in a ton of money, and it moved to a different conference, and on the balance sheet looked much better. And maybe we can just ignore maybe some of the football coaching hires for a little bit, but that's part of what happens with the big time program. Why did that end? Because in my brain I'm like, oh yeah, that was a capital L Louisville story, and it's been replaced by other Louisville stories in my brain.
Yeah, it's straight up palace intrigue. I mean, I will not lie to you. So Matt Bevin, the previous governor, kind of didn't think rules applied to him. Like, I don't know how else to say it than that. And came in having been elected. And look, there were real questions about how Louisville was using the university foundation as kind of a capital fund, getting things done in athletics in ways that were pretty sketchy at times. Sure. But overall, I mean, Tom Jurich was an unbelievably successful athletic director, period. But when Matt Bevin was elected governor, there were questions about why the board of trustees didn't really oversee a lot of what was going on with the foundation money in a more active way. And instead of, when it was his turn to start appointing people, he basically just fired the whole board and inserted an entire new board that he appointed all of them. And the FBI stuff happened with Pitino and Adidas and all that. They were both fired together. As overall, this is so bad, we just need a cleaning of the house. And they were both run out together. It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of political drama just going on in the state, kind of still continuing, right, with the current governor and everything that's related to that. But you mentioned Tom Jurich. There seemed to be a bit of a cult of personality. And I know certainly when this opening came back up recently, I know there's a lot of Louisville folks that would love to have Tom Jurich back. What is it about his kind of cult of personality almost that endeared him so much to the folks? Is it just all those buildings that got put up, or is there something else that kind of in the water that made him, kind of beloved by Louisville despite the ending?
Yeah, he is an extremely charming person. He has a very powerful personality, and he's very good at, in particular, hiring coaches and raising money. And you guys know what ADs do for a living. That's a pretty damn big part of the pie.
Yep.
And he's very good at that. And he run roughshod over people sometimes. Yeah, he did. And was he kind of ends justify the means a little bit sometimes? Yeah, he was, but he got a lot of results. I think what you see with a lot of just rank and file Louisville fans who are all very good people is you didn't really have to do a lot of nuance. Like if someone wants to do it, that's good, that's fine. And overall, you were usually safe. And he swung big sometimes and hit big sometimes. I mean, Jeff Walz had never been a head coach. Now he's one of the best in women's basketball, period. Dan McDonald never been a head coach. Louisville goes to the freaking College World Series. They have no business being in the College World Series as much as they are. An amazing
hosted regionals, right? Something that's almost unheard of at this where you are geographically. There, capital B program.
Yeah, got them into the ACC. He was the single biggest factor in them getting into the ACC over UConn. But Tom's not easy to get along with. And he wanted his way or the highway, and definitely really felt like he had earned the right to basically just sort of do things on his terms. When there was a very real sweeping sense that the university needs to make sure it's more active in oversight. Tom was just never going to go with that. And I think that there was a plan that was basically, I'm going to put a new board in there, and if he doesn't want to play ball, he's out. And that's what they did. And that's why there's so many sore feelings still over that. He did a good enough job that he deserved, I think, a better ending than he got. I think that's definitely true. And that's why it sort of just feels like it won't be let go by a lot of people.
Sure. I mean, especially if you had where a power vacuum that's centered around one particular person. It's not a perfect example, but I think a little bit about UCF, honestly, as an athletic department that put up a lot of buildings and made a lot of hires and grew very quickly. Yeah. And sometimes when you do that, maybe not every TPS form is filed correctly with the State House. And I think in Florida, the appetite for political oversight was a little bit different than it was in Kentucky. And not everybody responds to that. And if you bring in somebody that, and this is I apologize for using this term, but it's one really with endearment. If you don't bring in the right kind of asshole, when you had the right kind of asshole before, you can have a problem with your fan base and community. And that is an issue when your job as an AD is to ask those people for money, right? It seems like that's part of the issue that happened here. Let me ask you this, and maybe it's an unfair question, but between now a couple of athletic directors that have come and gone, and a couple of major coaches that have now been tied with scandals, and a weird relationship with the governor's office, and the challenge, the unique racial dynamic between the two major programs in this state and the metropolitan area versus everything else, like a lot of things just happen here, and they happen here even when you change the leaders, when it's a different coach or a different president or a different, and you kind of touched on this in the beginning that, hey, there's a fishbowl event, situation here where you're the biggest game in town. Is there anything else that you think is specific to Louisville that makes it a market where weird things are more likely to happen? I listen, I've seen the billboards. I know you like to talk about your water and it's how it's supposed to be tasty and everything, but is there something specific in there that makes this like not boring?
Yeah, there is one other element. I mean, you named a lot of them, but the other element is like Louisville's it's the biggest city in Kentucky by far, by a lot. And it's like 70-30, like 30%, 35% are Kentucky like graduates and fans who move here for work. And so even though this is like by far the biggest concentration of Louisville fans in Jefferson County and Oldham and Bullitt County and some of the surrounding counties, there's an enormous contingent of Kentucky fans too. And so it's not a geographical rivalry in that regard. Like your neighbor probably might be a Kentucky fan, and the guy you work with or report to, or the guy that you sit across from on a flight, is going to be a Kentucky fan. So the rivalry sort of never stops. And I think a lot of in-state rivalries are a lot more geographical than this one. And this one is like that you are mixed here, and it's not the same in Lexington. Louisville fans don't live in Lexington. They don't go to work there, that sort of thing. Aren't very many cities that are this big, no real competing pro sports, although the soccer program or franchise is growing quite well. But still, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about pro sports. Memphis is maybe the only city where Memphis is there, but Ole Miss has like a gigantic following. Tennessee maybe has a big following too. They have pro sports too. I mean, Louisville is really unique in that regard, and that kind of adds to the angst, about leadership and people who live in Louisville who don't like Louisville or do like Louisville, and you're kind of constantly suspicious of people. It's a unique place in that regard.
Yeah, Brian, I'm trying to think. Like Mississippi and Arkansas seem like two other places where you might have a little bit of this with power dynamics happening between like Northwest Arkansas and Little Rock, or Jackson and the major Mississippi programs with the maybe a similar racial split. But that's just me talking off the top of my head. I don't think there are too many other ones, right?
The thing that came to mind, just as Mark was talking about, was probably Arizona State. Obviously a lot of UA grads going to Phoenix, and that kind of mix there. And that's definitely one of the more underrated rivalries in terms of the nastiness. Maybe not quite on the level of bitterness that we see out of UKUL sometimes, just given probably the state of their respective football programs at times. But that came to mind immediately was kind of Arizona State, just because it is a unique mix, in terms of where the alums are living, and that would kind of transition into my next question. What's the donor base like for Louisville? Because it's got to be a bit more unique than say UK, just given the how young the university is and how it's kind of transitioned over the last couple decades.
It's growing and changing. You had kind of an older like Brown-Forman, tobacco and things like that. It was a big part of what they did early. Like the ceiling tiles at Freedom Hall where they used to play, have tobacco stains on them. Like it's a different, it's changed a little bit. But it's also kind of unique in that they have a great, not just donor base, but a great connection to just a corporate donorship that's here. Because if you're here as a corporation, this is the thing to advertise on, and so UPS, is a ginormous club here, and they've been very active in program things. I would say Louisville, I'm glad you mentioned it, sort of being sort of young in this regard. There's one more dynamic I wanted to mention about, I think Auburn, Alabama, or like you mentioned, the Arizonas or the schools that are in state. Most of them are peers, and one side sort of hates the other. There's a very real dynamic here of Louisville, like not wanting to see Louisville as a peer to Kentucky. Like Kentucky, and we're talking about people that went there, people in state government. It took decades of lobbying to get basically like the governor to force Kentucky and Louisville to play in basketball. Kentucky would not do it. It was representative of that thing where it was like, we're not going to treat you like you're as important as the University of Kentucky. And so Louisville's always had a chip on its shoulder. It was sort of, we do this without any help, right. That sort of thing. So that's a giant part of suspicion. And also, Louisville was not a great academic school for a really long time. And it's only now a pretty good one. And Kentucky's better. And when it comes to boards of trustees, professorships, things like that, older people who take those positions, why didn't they go to UK? Because it was a better school for that. Yeah. Louisville doesn't have a journalism department, so a lot of times you get your beat writer actually went to UK, and there's this suspicion, and it just never stops. And it's not crazy, but it doesn't always apply. But you don't always know.
One thing I have.
Yeah, I mean, and then you add into this fact that please correct me if I'm wrong, but Louisville reminds me a little bit of places like Cincinnati and New Orleans, where the parochial school system has an outsized importance in social circles within the business community, where it can be a bigger city, but it feels much smaller.
Yes.
So then when you add in that factor with distrust and having to share institutions, I'm just imagining socially, this can be a much more combustible mess, right? Like that's
absolutely. Yeah. That's a lesser factor than some of those other things, but absolutely. No, 100%. It's a big deal.
So
the dynamics with the rest of the state really are a constant thing we're thinking about.
So because of that, does it make sense for your next coach or your next AD or your next top level administrator to get somebody from like Washington State? Like, is it better to get someone who has absolutely no skin in the game and these blood feuds? Or do you want somebody or do you need, athletic director Raylan Givens, who dug coal with all these people and understands it in their blood? Like, I don't know what's the right move, right?
Well, Tom Jurich was from Colorado State, and I think Northern Arizona before that. Complete outsider, and came in and did some hard stuff. I mean, basically ushered out Denny Crum, a lot, and there were sore feelings about that. But then he hired Rick Pitino, and you're like, all right, that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
It was, I would think you add to it now. There were a lot of people who feel loyal to Tom, and I would think it would be best for Louisville to go outside so that no one feels like, oh, this is a person that represents this faction, right? And just be a total ball-busting outsider, whoever he or she might be. I think would be better in terms of healing old wounds. For the basketball coach or the football coach, I mean, there was a big push to try to get Jeff Brom from Purdue before they opted to keep, Scott. I understand at the coaching level, I think I'm more sensitive to that, more open to the idea that person would fly better with fans. But at the administrative level, I would really love total outsiders that don't seem like they're here to settle some score.
It's interesting you mentioned total outsiders because your interim AD, Josh Hurd, we're actually having an interview with him on D1 Extra and Collegiate Sports Connect, if you want to catch that. Nice segue, but nice plug. But Josh Hurd, he's going for this job. Obviously, he's been up for a couple other AD jobs, but it doesn't seem like he wants this Louisville gig and wants it badly based solely on his actions. I mean, obviously the Chris Mack saga and handling that is a big part of that. He's created his own NIL department at Louisville, really beefing up efforts to kind of prove that he is the AD and he's kind of taking charge of the department. What do you think about Josh's tenure so far, and does he have a shot just because of those kind of internal politics and the fact that simply you got a presidential shirts that's going on at the same time?
Yeah, I think Louisville's not going to have a choice but to kind of go backwards here. You would think, like in an ideal world, you'd hire a president and you'd hire an AD and then a basketball coach so that everyone's sort of aligned and everyone knows who's going to be answering to who. Presidential searches take forever, and AD searches can take a long time too. You can't not have a basketball coach. So I think they're going to go backwards and basically either make Josh permanent and then hire a basketball coach and then hire a president, knowing this is who you're going to inherit, or hire the basketball coach and then maybe deal with the AD. I have found Josh to be pretty impressive so far. And it's not, to me, it's nothing short of miraculous that they owed Chris Mack about $13 million if they just fired him, and he walked away with 4.8 over 4 years. And that was the complete opposite of what happened with Bobby Petrino in 2018, where Bobby basically just mailed it in. It's like, you fire me, I'm getting $14 million. You know it, I know it. And there was no avoiding that train wreck. And Josh is to get out from under that to where Louisville's really not hamstrung and looking for another coach. They're going to have to pay. And it's moves like that, embracing NIL, to where last week they get a quarterback that commits, and Pete Thamel's writing an article about it, and they're talking about Adidas awards in town and stuff. It's crazy. I think Josh has done extremely well. I think the biggest thing working against him is Vince was the interim AD, and then they just made him permanent, and things didn't go great in terms of the hires and that sort of thing. And I do wonder if people I don't want to do that again, but Josh is a lifetime college sports guy. He wins Villanova, and great job with Villanova too. He came back for this. So if they do that, I think people have been positive about him. And like, I just had Jeff Walls on the radio show today, and he's like, if they make Josh permanent, I'd be a big supporter of him. So he has the support of some of the prominent coaches too.
No, that is a difficult thing to do and important, not just in this market. It is rare, I think, that you would let an interim be the one responsible for making such a big hire right now. It's a little rare that you would let an interim take lead on running something or building something as big as an NIL expansion, right? Like, generally, you want to make sure that those are the kind of things that are more structured and secure over a longer period of time. It's harder to hire a coach if the coach doesn't know who his boss is going to be. So, I mean, I look at this as either this is a combination of terrible timing, we have to make the best of it, or by God, this is somebody who really wants this gig, and we're willing to trust them a little bit to figure things out.
I think there are a lot of people when he came back from Villanova that thought he was going to be groomed to perhaps take over for Vince, because Vince was always seen as kind of a temporary, he didn't have a college business background. He didn't have a college athletics background, and Josh does. That's all he ever wanted to do, and it's all he's really ever done. So I think there are a lot of people that viewed him as perhaps going to be next in line for this job anyway. But it is pretty obvious that they have a lot of faith in him, that they are letting him sort of do these big sweeping things. And I think he views all of them as auditions, and is probably pretty smart on his part.
So we obviously have an AD search, we have the presidential search, we have the basketball search. Like, after that gets done, what is kind of the future, the broad future of Louisville athletics, and kind of where the school and where the athletic department kind of goes from here?
Yeah, and hopefully the answer not being another one of those searches for any of those in the next 18 months. Let's make the cautious assumption whoever gets hired for these roles sticks around for a minute.
Well, let's hope that that's true too. I feel like there is a fear here of dipping into sort of Tennessee football territory, where you just sort of constantly you at some point get off that merry-go-round. Look, I think Louisville's really well positioned in like the era of NIL, and I thought Pete did a nice job kind of writing about some of that with the Pierce Clarkson kid that committed. Like, it's a giant city where you can be the biggest deal in town, and like UCLA is a big deal, but you're never going to be the biggest thing in LA. But you might be here, and that's basketball, football, women's sports, that sort of thing. Like, there's some value in that financially and that sort of thing. So I think they have a chance, if they sort of do it all right, to be really successful in kind of the NIL era. But you've got to get the same people here and rebuild some of these relationships that have just sort of been tattered by constant who's in charge of that turnover.
Yeah, I feel like that's the real story of being an AD in this era right now, particularly as some of these NIL efforts become more formalized and more corporate, and you're basically building a secondary athletics foundation. And we've seen in places like Florida State where that can fall apart over ego or over who's in charge of what, even if you have all of these demographic and financial and historical advantages. And if you don't, and you're like Murray, well then, God bless, because you're already working against so many other, challenging things, and you might still have some of those local conflicts. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see the potential in a lot of ways to be excited about the future if everybody can kind of get out of their own way here for a minute.
And that's probably the best way to think about it. Is like, can we stop stopping ourselves.
Yeah.
And just look, the basketball hire in particular did not work out, and all of the fallout from that has happened really just, I think, springs from the fact that he wasn't a good fit, wasn't as good. If he'd been a better coach, I don't think anyone is nearly as bold about perhaps wanting him out. He doesn't have to fire assistant coaches. Like it all really flowed out of him not getting results and not doing a very good job here. And I'll be kind of curious about Chris in the future. Like you guys talk to ADs and stuff more. I would love to know what ADs think about somebody who doesn't succeed at a place with lots to work with. And then the team looks dramatically different the minute that you're gone.
Yeah.
Can't imagine he'll play well if he decides to try to coach again.
Sometimes those people get second chances. Charlie Strong was somebody that people were interested in talking to. Willie Taggart was able to get other jobs. Sometimes you'll look and you'll think reach the similar conclusion that you did, that it was about fit. We've seen Chris Mack coach basketball teams that have performed well before. So I haven't talked to anybody. I'm not nearly as much of a college basketball person as you are, but I haven't heard anybody besmirch his ability to break down his own defense, or that he forgot how to work a chalkboard. We'll see. I would imagine some other AD will want to reach out to him too. I guess the question is that at a place like Boston College? Is that at a place like an A10 school? I don't know.
Well, I would be shocked if anything happens before there's some ultimate resolutions in terms of all the investigations. I think that would. That's awesome.
that too.
I mean, he might have a cup of coffee, certainly in the NBA or even the G League might be better suited to him, just given the lack of demands in terms of media appearances and kind of running that organization, just kind of being part of somebody that has the kind of organizational plan all set. Maybe that's another avenue back, and we kind of see the Nick Saban brand of rehab on the hoops court coming through the NBA. But I would be shocked if any sitting AD outside of somebody that has a connection to Chris says, you know what, yeah, you're our guy, just because of that thing holding over the head. I mean, we're seeing it with just pretty much everything out there right now. If you have an NCAA investigation tied to you, you kind of got to sit yourself out for a couple of years, maybe Bobby Petrino aside with going down to the FCS level. Those are the rare exceptions, I think, in terms of getting back in the game after the kind of tenure.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned one other dynamic that has just, and you guys know how it is. The delay is the punishment, but like the fact that what happened with Rick and the NCAA stuff with Adidas and all that. I mean, that was October of 2017, and it is February 2022 with no resolution. And I don't think Chris, nobody could have thought like it would linger this long. And Louisville's in the unique one in all of these. They're in the IRP like several others have been, but they're the ones who are within kind of that repeat offender window. But it's not really clear exactly what people at Louisville did, but it happened to a kid that went to Louisville. So I'm not knowing and not being able to say with any kind of clarity, are you going to get like a 2-year postseason ban? Things like that. Like it could happen. Conceivably. It looks like the AR is kind of soft, but conceivably it could happen. Has been a pretty big anchor on Chris Mack, and I don't want to dismiss how much of a factor that's been for him. On top of that.
No, it's a great point, and maybe I'm out of line here too. I would imagine it's been a challenge for your listeners and for Louisville fans over the last 5 or 6 years to not just then have coaches and administrators, people come in and maybe not meet expectations, but also you've had to defend people getting in trouble a lot. And I can imagine the idea of, we want a great basketball coach. We want somebody who's going to be comfortable in this market. Somebody who is going to be fine hopping on the radio and going to the Kiwanis Club and maybe having a couple of beers in the Knights of Columbus Hall somewhere and loving where we are. We'd also wouldn't mind having somebody who's a little bit more boring as far as not having the phrase continuing investigation attached to them, right? Or somebody that we don't we don't have to feel bad about rooting for. And maybe if that's not if that's not the A1 potential candidate, if you go like 1 or 2 lines down below, but you're not going to have to worry about that. I can understand maybe as somebody as one of your fans just being like, I'm tired of all this, that scandal fatigue. That's this is a factor, right?
It is a factor, but I will say that now 5 years, close to 5 years, 4.5 years removed from the firings and all that,
Yeah.
that fans very quickly boomerang back to. Sure did like it when we won a lot of games, even if
okay.
like
Yeah.
you hit this trough and be like, hey, look, at least he's not going to get us in trouble, that sort of thing. But it very quickly boomerangs right back to, well, damn, I miss winning games and being on College game day and being a 3 seed and going to the Sugar Bowl. Like, it doesn't take long for that to come back. And if you have to pick between like we suck, but we don't ever get in trouble versus we get in trouble here and there, but we win a lot, people are going to pick the latter.
Yeah, nobody wants a Saint whose crowning achievement is the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Like if you're gonna be successful at this level, you've got to win games. There may be something to be said for win games and maybe don't buy a motorcycle or win games and check for a wiretap kind of situation, and you have maybe a longer rope in some markets than you do in other ones, right? Like that's
right.
Yeah.
Look, it's a gamble. Like if you're going to be that kind of coach, though, and sort of run roughshod over rules or over people, you have to always win all the time. In 2018 is like the best example. Like Petrino was one of the worst people I've ever met, ever, like hands down. But he won a lot, and so you put up a lot. But the minute it goes south, you get no rope whatsoever. You're done. Get out of here. If we're going to lose and everyone is this miserable, you're done in a heartbeat. Even if we have to eat 14 innings.
No, I mean, like that's a great point. Like it's Missouri State. There was not a long line for his services at the FCS level. I know that Missouri State was a real dog of a job. And
that's a former Jurich. That's the AD there, Kyle Moats. So
yep, and it's worked. It reminds me a little bit of the market reaction, honestly, to Urban Meyer. Where you are bringing in somebody with baggage, both capital B, actual crime kind of baggage, and also you're an asshole, and a lot of people don't like you. And when you are beating Michigan 7 times in a row, that's one thing. When you're at Ohio State, and not only can you see the cracks starting to happen, and also you did really bad things, that's another thing. But if you're a Jaguars fan, like I'm not going to put up with this, and also the fact that you suck as a person. If somebody with who was, I don't know, like with some other faceless career NFL coordinator who I'm going to forget about 4 months from now did the things that Meyer did in Jacksonville the way that it happened, I think you would have gotten to at least finish the year, because it's not all the other things that come with it. And you haven't had that in Louisville for a minute.
Yeah, and I will say this: I don't want anyone listening to this to think that Chris Mack was like that. Yeah, and
that's a good point. Chris
Mack was apparently, by all means, he didn't like the media, and that's fine. I don't care if coaches like media; that's you don't have to. But in terms of day-to-day treatment of everyone that reported to him, or that's assisted, or worked in the athletic department, or donors, or boosters, or parents, or whatever, was a dream. But I think he was drained by the job. But I don't think that he ever was accused of mistreating anybody.
That's a good point. I think it's a good point. Brian, do you think? Do you have anything else here before we let Mark out, before something else crazy happens in Louisville?
I was going to say, if we let him go, something's bound to happen. But I think the takeaway from my conversation with this one is just Louisville athletics going forward. Let's be boring, but let's win. I think that seems to be summing up. Is let's be boring and win.
Be boring and competent. Let's be Kroger. But I mean, I guess not Kroger that much, because I know Kroger's in bed with Kentucky. But it's something where you don't have to think about it. I've joked about this all the time. If you're a fan, I don't think you want to know the name of your athletic director. You don't really want to know who your conference commissioner is. Like, there's someone down the street here. Yeah.
I don't want to know where my board of trustees members went to college, right? I don't want to know my board of trustees members. I shouldn't, but we do. And I would love to. I would love to go back to not knowing who's on there. I really.
That sounds great. Mark, thanks so much here for taking some time here with us. We really appreciate it. And if you're in the market, be sure to check out ESPN Louisville. Mark has been on this beat for a long time and knows the stuff. Thanks, man.
Anytime, guys. Enjoyed it.
I'm really glad that we were able to spend some time there with Mark. I've known Mark for a while. He knows the good, the bad, the ugly, and the profoundly weird in this area better than almost anybody that I know. Was kind enough even at the very beginning to point out that home field's pretty good. So he's an expert not just in the Louisville athletics, but also in officially licensed collegiate apparel. And if that wasn't a segue worth this money, Home Field Apparel, I don't know what is.
Hey, speaking of Louisville, the Louisville designs on Home Field are fantastic. Like I'm definitely there may or may not be a certain design with a certain Cardinal t-shirt already in my cart, ready to go for my next three-figure order from Home Field. But like they got some great designs for Louisville, and have been a great partner for that school as well. So it's gonna if you're listening to this episode, even if you don't have a true tie-in cards, they got some great designs from the shirts and from the hoodies that are especially warm nowadays, as we seem to have some weather coming across most of the country right now.
Dude, you're not kidding. And Louisville is a kind of a hard, I think, like logo to really do well, because it's a bird with teeth. And like Cardinals don't have teeth that look like that. And it should be a profoundly distressing image on a lot of different levels. One of the things that I think Home Field does very well is that they have found a niche, not just in like vintage logos, but in animals playing sports. Those vintage logos doing something. And if you give the bird with the teeth a basketball, you maybe have him lie down on his back and like spin it like he's a Harlem Globetrotter. Suddenly he doesn't look like an abomination against man and God, but something kind of cool and something that you wouldn't mind wearing around. They've managed to thread that needle very well with that collection. I don't have any connection to Louisville whatsoever. I'd only been to Kentucky a handful of times before taking this gig. I could be persuaded into buying one of those. But you don't have to buy just Louisville. You could buy Indiana. You could buy University of Utah. You could buy West Virginia. I'm still wearing my hoodie here because it's cold and gross. And my Marquette baby blue hoodie I didn't wash before I came out here on this trip. You can get any number of other schools this week. That should be dropping, shortly after this episode releases. We have the University of South Carolina, another challenging logo and typography and everything to do well. I'm sure they've nailed it, because just like they nailed Gonzaga, just like they nailed Cincinnati, just like they're going to nail a couple of these other big schools in the Big Ten, in the Pac-12, other basketball-focused institutions here for big new Saturday season 3. So you can grab your Home Field stuff, whether that's a horrific man-bird hybrid or something maybe a little bit less a little bit less weird at Home Field Apparel, and you can use promo code Extra Points. Save 15% off your first order. They're great. They're comfortable. They give us money. They have your favorite school, the people that you trust to tell you about your favorite college sports program. They love them too. Please support our sponsors and put on something nice for a change when you walk out of the house. This has been great. We're going to have, I think we're going to dip into the market explainers a little bit more as we head into the end of the college basketball season, into the great off season. That was a run of episodes that did really well for us, I think, before football. We have a couple other exciting interviews and some crazy news happening here over the next couple of weeks. Brian, I'll let you go attend to your children, and I'm going to go. And if you're listening to this on Friday, I probably am alive, but I'm about to try the midnight run to drive from Louisville to get to Chicago in time for my wife's birthday, so I can still be a dutiful husband before this ice storm. So thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting us. We'll catch up with you more for Going for Two and Extra Points next week.